On today's show, it is now June officially, which means the NBA draft is later this month. On today's show, we'll get into the latest with the news, some NBA draft prospects, Kobe Bufkin, and much more. All that's coming up right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1986 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Sunday evening into Monday. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for half off your first year. I also want to encourage you at the top of the show, as I always do, to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you find your podcasts. Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Please like, subscribe, rate, review, and of course, tell your friends about our podcast. It's actually going to be a special episode for one reason and one reason alone. It's episode 1986. That's actually the year of my birth, and it'll be the only time on this podcast history that I can say that about this podcast episode. So there you go. Calculate at your own risk how old I am, but that's what this was going to be. And we'll get into some draft stuff later on, some mailbag questions, a little bit of NBA Finals talk at the end of this podcast. But first, we will dive in with the latest on the Hawks front office search on this Sunday evening into Monday and our first show of the month of June. It's been quiet, as I've referenced a few times in recent days, but there was some reporting, at least a little bit of reporting that came out over the weekend. So we'll begin there. And it's been like 2.5 weeks since there had been anything reported on the front office search. The last thing that actually came before Saturday was the Masai Ujiri sparkler about 2+ weeks ago. And by the way, that's been quiet on that Masai front recently, in case you were wondering about that. But in his newsletter, Mark Stein, an awesome reporter, of course, nationally, acknowledged the quiet nature of the search for the Hawks right now, but also he wrote the following, quote, "One scenario making the rounds that Atlanta is said to be considering is rehiring Danny Ferry as a senior advisor to newly promoted GM Ansi Saleh." So, for some background, if you missed it, Ferry's name was kind of floated around earlier in the process for a Pogo search, and I said at the time, I found it to be very unlikely that he would be the choice to be the president of basketball operations, the number one person in the front office. Not impossible, but I found it to be unlikely from what I had heard and my research and making some calls and logic and all those things put into one. Reasons for that, obviously, are all over the place. Number one, he's been out of the league, not like out of the league totally, but like has not had a prominent front office job in about a decade now almost. That's tough to kind of go from that to being back in as the number one person. And perhaps the biggest reason, of course, is the history of Ferry in Atlanta, how he was parted ways with by the Hawks recently, without getting back, not recently, but when it happened 10 years ago, and without getting back into all that again, I believe it would be a very tough sell for the Hawks to turn around and hire Ferry in particular, and it would be easier for like any other team to do that other than the Hawks. Ferry does have a good record basketball-wise, but obviously the way he exited Atlanta, all that stuff. Now, with that said, hiring a senior advisor is not close to the same spotlight or the same dynamics as hiring a president of basketball operations. It's far more plausible to me that the Hawks could hire Danny Ferry in an advisory role than they would in a president role, a future sort of forward-facing number one role. There's some middle ground potentially in this because I think there's probably some interest in wrestler side and having Ferry in the building. He worked there before, of course. He has the experience that the wrestler is said to want. He built a good roster in Atlanta 10 years ago plus, and there's a relationship there, obviously. I have heard, though not with Ferry's name attached, keep that in mind, that the Hawks might want to add an older, experienced name to the mix in an advisory role if they choose. Again, if they choose, as I've been saying the whole time, is a possibility to give Ansi the number one job. They might want to bring in another kind of old, wise counsel kind of person in the stead of Ansi. The possibility, by the way, of Ansi running the show is getting more and more likely by the day. It is June 1st as I'm recording this, June 2nd as you're listening to it on Monday. I think, honestly, my guess at this point, educated guess, is that if you said, all right, pick one path that's going to happen now, I would say it's Ansi being the number one person. That's my best guess. I'm not reporting that, just using my deductive reasoning and some listening behind the scenes on that front. But back to Ferry, it would still turn some heads in a negative way. Even this reporting got some negative reaction on my Patreon. I wrote it up on social media, etc. That would still happen if the Hawks hired him in any capacity. But senior advisor is the kind of job, honestly, they don't probably have to even announce this if they were to do it. Like, it's not a huge like press release front page kind of hire. And that job is pretty vague in nature. You could have that person be involved in the process, but there are plenty of examples of senior advisors and organizations who are not really in the mix day to day. They might be in a different city, just kind of a sounding board for the GM or the owner. If they want some counsel and kind of run it by, like an idea, run it by somebody. Hawks fans may not remember this, but the Hawks did hire former Warriors GM Larry Riley as a senior advisor back in 2018. That was like just announced as part of a slew of operations, hires, and announcements from the Hawks. It wasn't a big, highly reported deal at the time. Riley was a veteran front office person that Travis Schlenk worked for in Golden State. It was basically like pseudo retired and was just like voice in the room, basically, for the Hawks. He had experience and gravitas and savvy and all that stuff. And even right now, the Hawks currently had, at least last year, 2 executive advisors, quote unquote, on the books in their front office. And even unless you're a total sicko, you wouldn't like know those people's names or know that they're around. So it could be, there's a pretty wide range of what a senior advisor actually does or looks like. So look, it's impossible to know right now from the outside what it might resemble if the Hawks did hire Ferry or anybody else, by the way, to a senior advisor role. Like, you wouldn't know how that was going to work until it actually happened. But it would get a lot more attention for sure if it was Ferry, given the history in Atlanta, his credentials, all that fun stuff. In the meantime, again, Ansi Saleh is currently running basketball operations. I get this question all the time. I know I answered it last week and maybe even a week before that. People still kind of confused by this. I get it. When the Hawks announced the Landry firing, in that press release, they said Ansi Saleh is running day-to-day basketball operations until they make a hire. That is still happening. Ansi's number one. You got Kyle Korver in the assistant GM role. The two of them are in the driver's seat right now when it comes to basketball operations. But as always, honestly, I hear rumblings all the time, still from people that are in the league, across the league, involved, that Nick Ressler is still part of the process. I don't like that. I think it's bad process, but that is still out there. The rumblings are still as strong as ever. He doesn't have that front office role anymore, but he's the alternate governor. He's in the mix from what I can tell, which is not a good thing, I don't think. Tony Ressler, by the way, obviously has every right to be involved. He's the Hawks governor / owner, but he's still in the mix, still very involved in basketball operations stuff. And something that's often ignored, I think, as kind of a non sequitur, but it's not a direct basketball job. But Steve Koonin is like one of the more powerful and active CEOs of any basketball team. It's a business side job, not a basketball side job, but Koonin's in the mix too. So lots of names still in play. Ansi's number one on the basketball operations call sheet, but with Nick involved, with Tony involved, still a lot going on there. Meetings going on right now for the draft, etc. The draft's 3.5 weeks away, and there's no deadline for making a hire. As I've been saying the entire time, the Hawks don't have to do anything quickly if they don't want to. One of the benefits, if you want to look at it that way, is that they don't have to do anything quickly because they have Ansi. He's in the job, running the show. And again, I think right now, I'm not reporting, but I think it is now trending towards likely that Ansi is the number one going into the season, but that doesn't have to be the case. But in the meantime, they're just kind of rolling along. And one of the odd things about this is that if they don't hire anybody else, they don't have to make an announcement. Maybe at the draft, if they had made a hire and Ansi has to speak to the media for the first time, because right now, Ansi Saleh has not talked to the Atlanta media at any point. That's one of the, if you're the Hawks, one maybe benefit, quote unquote, is that you don't have to talk because you're in this transition period. They're not doing any draft workouts publicly. It's kind of been radio silence for the Hawks. The only person that has talked to the media on behalf of the Hawks since exit interviews is Dyson Daniels via Zoom from Australia because he won an award. Everything else, radio silence. So interesting situation. But in the meantime, that's the latest on the Ferry thing. They're deep in the process for the draft and free agency and trade stuff that goes along with that. So buckle up. But in the meantime, Ansi's running the show and a little bit of a sprinkler of reporting, but could be nothing. And we'll find out sooner rather than later. All right, everybody. We'll have more to come on the podcast, including your mailbag questions on the NBA draft, Kobe Bufkin, NBA Finals at the end of the podcast, and much more. But first, a word from our partners on the podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. We've all done this in the past, I'm sure, but at times I've looked at my bank account and wonder where all my money happened to go between dining out and entertainment, online shopping, etc. It's easy to lose track sometimes, but that is where Monarch Money comes in. Monarch Money is your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control of your finances. And Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track your accounts, your investments, and your spending all in one place. You actually just stop managing your money and start building wealth instead. When I started using Monarch, I realized how much money I was spending on food in particular each week. That's just one example. And now I start budgeting smarter and saving more money in the process. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you actually use Monarch to use your finances and check those things there, track your spending, even plan your long-term goals all in one place. And if you want to manage your money and check with your partner, it can be smoother than ever as well. You can track shared accounts and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without any of the stress. Take control of your finances right now with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com. 50% off your first year with Monarch Money. That is monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. All right, a question that I will get into now from Jamie, who says, you've said that there are 25 or 30 players the Hawks could draft with their 2 first-round picks. Can you share some draft prospects that you are higher on than the consensus? So the question from Jamie, I'm doing a lot of my draft talk with guests on the show, at least so far, and I have some more scheduled in the future. I figured it'd be a good time to kind of give some of my own evaluations in this process. I've been watching film this entire time, learning, reading, pulling numbers, all those things. I'm not a finished product just yet on my draft stuff, but still getting closer and closer. And first things first here, consensus is kind of a tricky word to evaluate, especially with more than 3 weeks till the draft. I'm going to use, for this reference, the consensus big board that John Chepkevich does at rookiescale.com. It's a good mainstream available proxy for a consensus. It's not perfect, but you're trying to average a bunch of stuff together and get a good feel for what the league thinks, what the public thinks. By the way, there's always a split of some kind between the internet, like draft Twitter and people that work on the internet, and actually what people in the league are saying. There's always that kind of disconnect. I would also say it's useful to keep stock of like ESPN's board, the Athletics board, because those are very like intel based more so than people on the internet's boards will be. It's all kind of a mix, but anyway, using the rookiescale.com consensus board, I came up with 6 names that I am higher on than the current consensus ranking. Again, it's not a comprehensive list. I used some names like people that I thought I was a few spots higher on than consensus. And also, I picked no one in the top 10. That wasn't on purpose, but it's not like in the order that I have in right now on that list. But there's like nobody that I think is massively better than where they're currently ranked. And part of that's that I think this is kind of a flat top. You know, after the top 2, obviously it's Flagg and Harper and 1 and 2. That's kind of what I have as well. So 3 to 10, kind of a jumble. Anyway, to the players that I have higher than the consensus. One is Arizona's Carter Bryant. He is 13th on this consensus board. He's a top 10 guy for me. He's a forward with a 7-foot wingspan. He's a great athlete. He had really good shooting splits and a smaller role at Arizona. I think he's going to project to be like kind of that 2-way forward that every team wants. Big, physical, athletic, can shoot a little bit. I've heard he's been good in workouts. Like, I don't think he's like going to be a star. He could be, but I think that I have him a couple spots higher than the consensus. And by the way, that means if I'm the Hawks, if he's available at 13. There's a good chance, not for sure, a good chance that he's my number 1 player available. I think if there's guys ahead of him or at least at the same level as him, maybe Derek Queen if he slips, like those guys are kind of in the same range. But I think the smart money is if Bryant falls to 13, I would like that pick quite a bit. So that's something like that. UConn's Liam McNeely is 17th on the board. He's a like late lottery guy for me, like 15, 14, 13, something like that. He does pretty well, actually, athletically at the combine. That was a good sign after an up and down, kind of injury-plagued freshman year at UConn. It was also kind of been a bad role for him at UConn. Like he was a kind of a primary option a lot, but some nice flashes along the way there. I think he's better suited as a role player. Again, big, like 6'7", 6'8", forward, can knock down shots, does a little bit of a shot creation thing if you want him to, defend enough. Like not a perfect player, but certainly one that has a skill level and a pedigree that I like. Georgetown's Thomas Sorber is 18th on the board. He's for me a top 15 player in this draft. He measured with a huge wingspan at the combine, 7'6", does a lot of things well on both ends of the floor, despite being a very young player. He's still 19 years old. I don't think he has like a huge star upside, but he has great feel, good passer, good defender at the NBA level. I think is going to be in the future. Just a lot to like a starting center kind of player, long-term projection for me. Rasheer Fleming of St. Joe's is 23rd on the board. I have him in the mid-teens. So like for me, he probably won't be the number one player on my board at 13 for the Hawks, but then put this all in kind of Hawks speak. But if you went 13th, I would get it. And at 22, he's likely to be like one of the top players about the top player available if he's still available at that point in time. He measured huge at the combine, 7'5" wingspan, more than 230 pounds, 9'1" standing reach, like a massive, massive human being. I don't love his like feel for the game and like secondary stuff, passing, defensive feel. That's kind of the question marks for him. But the physicality is definitely there. The size is definitely there. He had 64% true shooting at the college level. Like he could really shoot it. He can defend multiple positions. Like, I get it. I get the drawbacks for sure. That's why he's a little bit lower for me, like not a lottery guy. But at 23, that's too low in this class for me on Fleming. And then finally, Hanson Yang is number 41 on the consensus board. For me, he's like a late first or at least a top 35 guy for me in this class. 19-year-old center from China, measured 7'1" without shoes, has massive hands. Like he's true center size. Still very much a developmental kind of long-term bet, but I like the passing. He might be really able to shoot it eventually. Potentially, there's some decent mechanics there. I don't love his athletic tools, honestly. I think he might be a pretty limited defender, but he is massive, which definitely helps. It's more like, can he switch? Can he play non-drop coverage? Like those are questions that I'm going to have for sure. I see people get a little bit too high on Yang at this point in time, like it's like a lottery pick. I can't get there. But at 22, it's like he certainly could be in the mix at 22. That's a reasonable thing to say. I think for me, he's definitely too low at 41. I get the appeal. I'm not over the moon about Yang from what I've seen so far, but I have more to watch. And at the very least, the tools, the size, the passing gets me to being higher on him than the baseline is right now. This one is the last one. Almost not even worth mentioning, but Cedric Coward is still 29th on this consensus board. And that's not a misprint. People have, I was talking about him potential lottery for the last few weeks, but ESPN's latest big board has him 29th. So like there's a split on him for sure. There are people that have him in the lottery or like at least like top 15, and people that don't kind of get it. So there's a big split there. Athletic wing, 7'2" wingspan. He barely played this year at Washington State, had an odd trajectory before that, played D3, Eastern Washington, was going to go to Duke, and then decided to enter the draft instead. He's got comparisons pre-draft to Jalen Williams. Obviously, that's a huge lofty comparison, but as a late riser, West Coast player, lottery guy at the end of the process, etc. I think I wouldn't go that far on Cal right now, but for me, he's like a top 20 player in the class, still listed at 29th. So he has to be on the list, and we'll see how high he goes by draft night. And then a few quick second-round names. Again, the Hawks don't have a pick in the second round, but these guys are still relevant. And if you're the Hawks, it's not hard to get a second-round pick. Also, if you missed it on Friday, on the last show that I did, I talked about Nikola Jurisic, who the Hawks drafted last year in the second round, who's still kind of in that second-round kind of level player for the future. But anyway, if they want to get back in the mix here, I have Sion James of Duke as a top 35 guy. He's 46th on that list. Kobe Brea is 43rd on the list. I have him in the top 35. Honestly, just a great shooter. That's all he really does, but that's kind of enough for me in the top 40. And then this is maybe a homer pick, but I also believe it. Michigan big man Vlad Golden is 60th on the list. I have him like 45. So not a huge difference, but certainly a difference nonetheless. So there you go. A quick look at the guys that I'm a little bit higher on. Again, not a comprehensive list. There's still players that I might have a spot or two ahead of these guys. I'm not doing the guys I'm lower on. Maybe I will do that later on. But in the meantime, some optimism here in the mix when it comes to evaluating prospects. All right, a question from Marshall who says, how much would you consider Kobe Bufkin when making the 2 first-round picks? It's a good question, honestly, because it's about a player, but it's also philosophical in nature. I'm planning to do a more comprehensive Kobe Bufkin player capsule with Glenn Willis, good friend of the podcast, at some point this summer, as I will with any player on the roster. But it's going to be a challenge in some ways because Kobe has not played very much through 2 years. Everyone knows that, but just worth emphasizing He's played 27 NBA games, 14 G League games, and 5 Summer League games in the last 2 years. That's it. Tiny sample size, obviously. He's still very young, 21 years old. He's younger than guys that are in this first-round mix this year, like multiple of them. So that's worth keeping in mind. At the same time, he has not been amazing enough to assuage the doubts of just not playing basketball. The durability questions are real. That has to be the case after 2 years of this. One thing that I will say is that just because he's been hurt recently, it's not like he's going to always be hurt. Like, it's not a chronic injury. If it was like one bad issue or like he had a bad knee or something like that, that's more concerning to me. It's been a little bit unlucky so far. That might still be the case. Like, you got to prove that you're going to be healthy, but I'm not putting the like never can stay healthy label on Bufkin just yet. He has to prove he's going to stay healthy. I think the entire team would agree with that. He would too, I'm sure. Got to prove yourself in the NBA level. There you go. Now, there's also a distinction that I would draw between Bufkin being a 15th pick overall 2 years ago and if he was a top 5 pick, you just get more latitude. The team's going to be more in on you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to go all the way into this, but it's just logical if you think about it for a second. You're not committed forever to the 15th pick of the draft. Do you want to hit that pick? Obviously you do, but the Hawks could trade Kobe this summer, and it would not shock me at all. I do think that they still like him from what I hear. Quinn's always liked Kobe from what I understand. And there's still a lot of talent with Kobe Bufkin. That's undeniable. Going back to the pre-draft stuff, even flashes in the NBA level, G League level, et cetera. He's got a pretty appealing archetype as a guy who can play, in theory, again, it's still all in theory right now, point guard or play next to Trey as a guy who has real shooting guard level size. That is, and good enough defense to play with Trey as well. That's a good appealing package on the whole, even if, again, it's only theoretical right now, which I definitely understand. So that's the player side of things. Then you have a philosophical argument about best player available and how much the Hawks should consider Bufkin specifically, given what he has not proven to date. For me, I say this a lot. I'll say it again here. My overall take would be that they really shouldn't consider Bufkin too much, if at all, when weighing who to draft. That doesn't mean you totally ignore him. He's on the team. That does matter. He's still a talented guard prospect. But Bufkin's presence on the team should not stop you from taking a guard in this draft if you believe that guard is the best guy you can draft. That's what it comes down to me. That might seem silly or simple or whatever, but for me, I see people all the time, and I don't agree with this. There are Hawks fans that will tell you they have to draft, quote unquote, have to draft a center, or they quote unquote have to draft a backup point guard. I don't believe either one of those things. Could they draft a center? Sure, they could. Could they draft a guard? Sure, they could. I don't believe in drafting for fit, generally speaking, but especially when you're talking about like mid or late first round picks on a team that has a bunch of guys already. You're drafting the best players available. The only exception to that potentially is if you have 2 guys available in the same tier of evaluation. Maybe you get preferential there with fit on either schematically or position or whatever. That's fine. What you don't want to ever do is jump up or jump down a tier based on position. I would not do that, generally speaking. So I don't honestly love the guards in the Hawks range of this class. If you notice, none of the guys that I listed off earlier as guys that I am higher on than the consensus are guards. That wasn't on purpose, but I realized that as I was making notes for the podcast, like none of those guys I'm not higher on the consensus on any of these guards. Now, I don't hate them either. Like there are some real first round prospects in this class that are guards. And by the way, obviously I'm removing Dylan Harper and those guys at the top. Like for instance, just Nolan Traore or Ben Seraph or Walter Clayton Jr., Jace Richardson. But those guys are all like top 25 players in the class. They are. But I don't think that, especially at 13, I can pretty much guarantee you a guard is not going to be my highest rated player at 13. Unless someone weirdly falls. Like maybe Akashonis falls, that would be different. But if you follow the consensus boards and all that stuff, it will surprise me if my personal top player is a guard at 13. At 22, could certainly happen. I think Traore, even Clayton Jr. could be my top player available at that spot. That's fine. And there is no reason you couldn't draft a guard. None at those spots if you like those players, to be very clear. So again, personally, I wouldn't draft Seraph or Traore or Clayton Jr. or Richardson at 13. I would not do that. It wouldn't be insane to do that if you love that guy. I will practice what I preach here. the middle of this draft is pretty flat. If you have an opinion that's different than mine, I'm not going to come out and say you're an idiot. I don't believe that. So keep that in mind. If the Hawks were in the top 5, top 6, and for instance, like I think you worry more about Trey than Bufkin. And what I mean by that is, like, if I have the 5th pick, I personally would not take Jeremiah Fears as the Hawks, because I don't think Jeremiah Fears is my best prospect in that class, but also I would have some real concerns about playing with Trey. And at the top 5 pick, that does matter on some level. At 13 and 22, you're taking the best player available with very few exceptions. Kobe shouldn't stop you from drafting anyone, nor should he make you draft anyone. Like I've seen that other case too, like Kobe's a bust or whatever. Now you got to draft another guard. No, Kobe may not be anything in Atlanta. I have said repeatedly already this summer that at the very least, the Hawks have to bring in somebody else at guard to at least compete with, if not play over Bufkin this year. I do believe that. But it doesn't mean you have to draft a player. So I'm pretty firmly on the best player available train. Bufkin shouldn't stop them. And if it's the best player available, take that guy and figure it out later. All right, last thing on the show before we get out of here, a brief NBA Finals look ahead now that we're set on that front after the Pacers advanced over the weekend. I reserve the right to talk about the finals more on a podcast with a guest if I want to. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that, but in case I don't, people ask me about kind of what I think about the series. So a brief kind of 5-minute look at that right now. Personally, I don't care about the small market thing. I love basketball. I'm a sicko. It won't rate well. I get that. I don't care. And by the way, the NBA, it's the first year of a new TV deal. They're not worried about this that much either. I'm sure they'd like to have big markets, but if there was ever a good time to have a bad market, quote unquote, finals, it's right after you sign a big deal. So whatever. Anyway, matchup wise, I think OKC, by the way, is clearly an elite team, so they should be there. And Indiana's been playing great for a long time. Indiana, the thing to watch here is OKC's defenses against Indiana's offense. That's the matchup. Everyone knows that, but it's true. Indiana's on a total heater right now, offensively. They're shooting 40.1% from 3 in the playoffs as a team. Just for reference, the highest rated team in the league this year shot 38.7%. The Pacers shot 36.8% from 3 as a team in regular season against bad teams. 40% in the playoffs is ludicrous over 3 series. And no one is shooting better than 36% from 3 other than Indiana in these playoffs over multiple series. They are on a heater. They have 4 of their starting level guys shooting 45% or higher, or whatever it is. Nesmith's 50% for the playoffs. Nembhard's 48%. Siakam's 46%. Those guys are not great shooters. They can all shoot, but they're on a heater, suffice to say. Will that continue? Maybe. It's definitely possible. It's a make or miss league. You got to make shots. I'm big on process, but hey, it's all small sample size. You got to make shots. It's win or go home time now. But the of note, I would say the Thunder have been generationally good defensively this year. They have a ton of guys to throw at Halliburton, a ton of guys to throw at Siakam. And the biggest thing in the whole series might be turnovers. OKC was number 1 in the league this year in creating turnovers and also avoiding them on offense. Number 1 on both ends of the floor. Massive differential there. Indiana is awesome at taking care of the ball on offense. Halliburton is the best at that of any guard in the league. But OKC is the best ball hawking team in recent memory, honestly. I don't think Indiana is going to win the turnover battle. They'll do better than Minnesota did. I'm pretty confident in that. But that's an area to circle, I would say. And that means Indiana's got to score in the half court. I think Halliburton's going to have some trouble in this series. He may not have trouble in every game. He's really good. But he does have a tendency to kind of just disappear when he's not got it going. For instance, he's taken 13 shots or fewer in 7 different playoff games. Halliburton just kind of coasts when he's not cooking, which is okay. He's a good passer, all those things, but he can't afford that in this series. Just can't. And also, OKC's biggest vulnerability defensively is rebounding by a lot, and Indiana is terrible on offensive glass. So it's a tough matchup for them in that area. I do think the other side of the floor, OKC's offense can bog down some in the half court in particular when they're not getting steals or whatever. And Indiana's got multiple guys to throw at Shea. But if Nesmith is not either on the floor or out of foul trouble, tough sledding there defensively, I think Siakam will get a dose of Jalen Williams and be fine there at least. But it's so weird. Like Indiana's reputation is earned for running and playing super fast all the time. But that's not a huge advantage against OKC. OKC wants to play slower on offense, probably, by not turning over. Like, I don't know. It's just interesting to me that balance of ball security and pace and who dictates that. It's going to matter a lot. But I won't go even longer on this. I am going to take OKC pretty comfortably in the series. Like OKC in 5, I think, is my pick officially. I don't mean to be disrespectful to the Pacers because I really don't. Like, they've been playing really, really well for a while now. And to bring it back to the Hawks for a second, it's honestly reminiscent of what happened with the 2021 Hawks in that the Hawks, that Hawks team played at an elite level for about 3 months before the playoffs, but only the sickos noticed it, if that makes sense. That Hawks team finished like 28-11. They were really playing at an elite level for a long time. And this same thing happened with Indiana this year. Indiana has been playing at a top 5 team in the league level since like January. And before that, they weren't, but they're similar to the Hawks in that way. But it's still a bad matchup for them, I think. And OKC is still, in my mind, underrated by some people because they haven't won it yet and they're super young. And I get all that. It's a weird archetype of a team winning the championship. But the Thunder have historically great numbers this year. They really do. They had a 12.7 net rating this season, and it's over 11 in the playoffs. That's ludicrous. They had 80 wins before the finals. That's crazy. They may not win in 5, obviously. I'll be pretty surprised if they lose, barring injury. Now, our friends at FanDuel have OKC at minus 750. That's a massive, massive spread in the finals. The implied odds of that is 88% for the Thunder. That might be a little high, but I think they're going to win the series. I think the Thunder are better. They have home court advantage, and I think it's going to be their time. I will pick them now on the record. Not going to shy away from that. I think Indiana has a chance, and no one should say that they don't. Even if you're a huge proponent of OKC, like injuries can happen, shooting variance. Again, if Indiana shoots like this, like they have in the rest of the playoffs, it gets really interesting. That's all fair to say. But I like OKC in 5. I think they're really good. Like historically so, and they're probably underrated right now. And maybe that'll stop being the case in a couple of weeks here. But hey, anyway, it's only on Thursday. Maybe I'll do more on this, but I guess I don't want to, or I don't have time to. My pick is on the record. OKC in 5. And sorry, Pacers fans. I do enjoy watching the Pacers. They're fun to watch. And there you go. All right, everybody. That's all I have on this Sunday evening into Monday show. I'm going to have scheduled, hopefully, guests later on in this week. So please subscribe to this podcast anywhere you find your podcasts. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. Follow us on social media. We are at Locked On Hawks on Twitter/X. I am there at BT Rowland. I'm also on Blue Sky at BT Rowland. And follow my non-podcast work at patreon.com/BT Rowland. All right, everybody. Thanks again for listening. Hope you have a great week, and we'll see you all next time.